Let's get started. Let's discuss the kidnapping and murder of Jacob Wetterling. This is another lecture. I'm Alexei. To frame our discussion, we will examine what happened in Minnesota in 1989, how it was finally resolved in 2016, and what that arc teaches us about evidence, institutions, and prevention.
Hi, I'm Priyanka. I'm here to ask questions we, as listeners and readers, tend to have when a case spans decades. I will try to be concise and curious.
Let's begin with the foundations. In simple terms, this is the story of an 11-year-old boy, Jacob Wetterling, abducted at gunpoint on a quiet road near his home in St. Joseph, Minnesota, in October 1989. The case remained unsolved for almost 27 years, becoming a painful, long-running mystery for a community and a country. If you will, think of it as a single missing piece in a jigsaw puzzle that thousands of people kept turning over in their hands, day after day, for decades, until one person finally admitted where he had hidden it. In more technical terms, we are looking at a cold case resolved by a combination of forensic DNA in a related offense, strategic prosecutorial leverage through federal charges, and a plea agreement that produced a confession and the recovery of remains. Along the way, we will touch several core elements. Forensic DNA matching, which links biological evidence to known individuals. Sex offender registries, first mandated nationally by the 1994 Jacob Wetterling Act and later expanded by Megan's Law and the Adam Walsh Act. The statute of limitations, which sets time limits for bringing certain charges. Civil commitment, a legal mechanism to confine a sexually dangerous person after a prison term. And the logic of plea bargaining, where truth recovery and public safety may be prioritized when a conventional homicide prosecution is uncertain.
So, I guess we can start by thinking about the moving parts. A child abduction at night, limited early evidence, later DNA in a related case, and then a federal plea that finally led to answers. That seems to be the scaffold, right?
Exactly. And to appreciate the stakes, it is crucial to understand that Jacob's case helped catalyze major U.S. policy on monitoring convicted sex offenders. The 1994 Jacob Wetterling Act required states to establish sex offender registries. Megan's Law in 1996 expanded public notification, and the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act in 2006 further standardized and strengthened these systems. At the same time, we must acknowledge investigative misunderstandings and missed opportunities that delayed resolution, including leads not fully pursued, and the difficulty of working a masked, nighttime abduction with sparse physical evidence. Some basic points of history will orient us. In October 1989, shortly after 9 p.m., Jacob was abducted at gunpoint while biking home with his brother Trevor and their friend Aaron Larson. The masked perpetrator forced compliance, separated Jacob, and released the other two boys under threat. Investigators mounted a massive search from that night onward. Nearly 27 years later, in September 2016, after a negotiated plea arrangement, Danny James Heinrich led authorities to a pasture near Paynesville. Jacob's remains and clothing were recovered, and authorities confirmed identification by dental records shortly thereafter. It is worth noting Heinrich testified he used a police scanner on the night of the crime to avoid roadblocks, and that he later returned to the burial site to move remains when a jacket became exposed.
And, just to keep the timeline in mind, the formal confession in court came in September 2016, and the sentencing on the federal child pornography count, with a 20-year term, occurred in November 2016. Prosecutors agreed not to charge murder under the plea, but the court noted possible civil commitment later. That is my quick checklist.
Before we proceed, a brief personal note. My interest in this case arises from how societies weigh uncertain evidence over time. In mathematics and in forensic inference, we ask, how do new data update our beliefs? Here, a late-breaking DNA match in a related 1989 assault, combined with a carefully structured plea, transformed a decades-long prior probability of guilt into an admitted, detailed narrative and a recovered body. The societal implications are immediate: truth, closure, and policy learning.
I think the next thing we should talk about is three big questions. First, why did it take so long to solve? Second, what if the statute of limitations had not expired in the related Jared Shirel case? And third, are there still gaps in our current prevention and response? That seems like a good map. So, building on that, why did it take so long to solve the Wetterling case?
Several interacting factors. First, the initial scene conferred anonymity on the offender: darkness, a stocking cap mask, a handgun used as coercion, and rapid separation of the victim, so there was little usable physical evidence. Second, while investigators rather quickly interviewed Danny Heinrich in December 1989 and even obtained a DNA sample, the available forensic material did not produce a match to Jacob's case. Third, we observe lead management challenges. In 1991, Dwayne Hart reportedly told investigators that Heinrich had asked about disposing of a body and that he had seen suspicious items. Yet the record indicates that tip was not meaningfully pursued. Additionally, a series of attempted and actual assaults on boys in the Painesville area in 1986-1987 was not, at the time, integrated into a focused serial pattern. Decades later, investigators revisited those incidents, aided by citizen researcher Joy Baker. But by then, the temporal distance had grown large. Fourth, a key breakthrough emerged only in 2015, when Heinrich's DNA matched evidence from the January 1989 kidnapping and sexual assault of Jared Shirel in nearby Cold Spring. This was profoundly informative, but the statute of limitations barred prosecution of that kidnapping. Prosecutors then executed a search warrant, discovered child sexual abuse material, brought 25 federal charges, and used that leverage to negotiate a plea. Under the agreement, Heinrich pleaded to one federal count, led authorities to Jacob's remains, and provided a full confession. Prosecutors, in turn, agreed not to bring murder charges. In simpler terms, time, technology, and strategy finally aligned, where for many years they had not.
I'm curious about the role of journalism here. Given those investigative delays, did reporting actually influence the investigation's direction?
It is worth noting that investigative journalism functioned as an external audit. American public media's In the Dark devoted its first season to this case, highlighting systematic issues in lead follow-up and interagency coordination within the Stearns County Sheriff's Office. While journalism does not substitute for police work, such scrutiny can reshape public expectations, prompt institutional self-examination, and at times reorient priorities. Similarly, Joy Baker's independent work on the Painesville assaults in 2014 helped bring those earlier incidents back into focus. To be precise, the link between those assaults and Heinrich was never adjudicated, but the recontextualization of patterns matters in cold case reasoning.
So moving on. The counterfactual. What if the statute of limitations had not expired on the Shirel case in 2015?
If we model that scenario, prosecutors could likely have charged Heinrich directly with the 1989 Cold Spring kidnapping and sexual assault upon the DNA match, which would have generated immediate and substantial leverage. Two plausible downstream effects follow. First, earlier leverage may have produced a plea and confession regarding Jacob's fate years sooner, possibly yielding a faster recovery of remains and earlier closure for the Wetterling family. Second, an earlier incapacitation could conceivably have prevented further harms if any were otherwise at risk of occurring. That said, counterfactuals require humility. We cannot guarantee that a prosecution would have produced a confession about Jacob, nor can we know precisely how a jury would have evaluated the evidence. But in terms of probability, removing the time bar increases the likelihood of earlier resolution.
Can we say that legal reforms have changed the landscape since the 1990s? Like, are statutes of limitations different now for child sexual abuse in many places?
Yes, many jurisdictions have extended or eliminated statutes of limitations for certain child sexual abuse offenses, reflecting a better understanding of delayed reporting and trauma. At the federal level, the Adam Walsh Act contributed to standardization of registration and monitoring, and states have iterated on their own limitations periods and evidentiary rules. One must always verify the current law in a given jurisdiction, but the trend line has been toward giving survivors more time to seek criminal accountability. The chiral constraint in 2015 is therefore instructive. It demonstrates how legal architecture can shape and sometimes thwart otherwise probative forensic breakthroughs.
To shift gears a bit, present-day prevention. Are there still gaps in our child safety and abduction response systems?
There are strengths and limitations. Strengths include integrated alerting systems such as Amber Alerts, broader public awareness of grooming behaviors, standardized sex offender registration and notification, improved evidence collection, and in many agencies, better case management tools. Encryption of police communications also complicates the old tactic of monitoring a scanner to evade capture. Nonetheless, gaps persist. Sex offender registries are monitoring tools, not predictive or preventive panaceas. Empirical findings on their marginal effect on recidivism are mixed, and notification regimes can produce unintended consequences if not paired with risk-based management. Resource constraints in smaller jurisdictions still hinder exhaustive lead follow-up, and information sharing across agencies can be uneven when cases cross county or state lines. Emerging technologies offer promise and caution. Advances in forensic DNA, including genealogical approaches, can unlock cold cases when lawful and properly overseen. Geospatial analysis and improved tip triage can prioritize leads. Community education, especially survivor-informed programs like those advanced by the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center, equips families and schools with practical prevention strategies. But privacy, due process, and equitable enforcement must remain central. Mathematically, we dislike false positives. Practically, communities do too. The research frontier includes improving public notification, so it is accurate, actionable, and not merely anxiety-inducing. Honing risk assessment tools that are transparent and validated, and ensuring that when a high-priority lead arrives at 2 a.m., someone actually follows it to the end.
What if we thought about it like this? Prevention is a layered system. Education, rapid alerts, evidence collection, and then long-term monitoring. If any layer is thin, the whole structure is fragile. That makes me wonder how we evaluate each layer's real-world performance, not just its intent.
That is well put. In conclusion on this question, we should invest in what measurably reduces victimization, emphasize early reporting pathways for children, strengthen interagency protocols for lead management, and maintain legal frameworks, including civil commitment where constitutionally appropriate, that address individuals who present demonstrable ongoing danger. This, then, is prevention as a disciplined, evidence-based enterprise, rather than a set of slogans. To summarize, Jacob Wetterling was abducted at gunpoint in October 1989 in St. Joseph, Minnesota. Nearly 27 years later, after a plea agreement, Danny Heinrich led investigators to Jacob's remains near Paynesville and confessed. We explored 3 questions: why resolution took so long, how a different statute of limitations might have altered the timeline, and which gaps remain in our current systems. For further study, examine how Megan's Law and the Adam Walsh Act built upon the 1994 Jacob Wetterling Act, and how those policies are evaluated today. Thank you for listening. We observe that careful evidence, steady institutions, and public vigilance together can bring truth to light, even late. This concludes our lecture for today.
Thank you, Professor. And thank you to everyone for thinking this through with us.